Thanks everyone for being with us today. I want you to join me welcoming our magnificent health panel. In this panel, I'm going to ask you and invite you to reflect, navigate, and think with us through the challenges faced by the region today. What opportunities do these challenges create? How the future of healthcare in the region would look like, and what we can do as a diaspora. Before we start the panel, I would like to take the chance to introduce our panelists. We have with us Mr. Jad Bitar, who is the Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group. Jad leads Boston Consulting Group's healthcare practice in the Middle East. Dr. Maya Saeed, she's the co-founder of Outcomes for Me, which is a startup that focuses on personalized medicine. She is an ex-BCG consultant and pharma executive. Dr. Mohammed Harzallah, he's a physician, neuroscientist, and the founding director of the Palestinian Neuroscience Initiative at Al-Quds University. Professor Rana Dajani, she's a Jordanian molecular biologist, associate professor at the Hashemite University in Jordan, and a fellow at Harvard. She is also the president of the Society for Advancement of Science and Technology in the Arab World. And Professor Shadi Saleh, who's the associate vice president for health affairs, founding director of the Global Health Institute, and professor in health management and policy at the American University of Beirut. So, I think a very important point was highlighted today that we should not focus on the challenges themselves, but we should focus on the opportunities created by these challenges. So the WHO defined healthcare as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. But this is not the case in the SGLP region. I want to open this panel by exploring the challenges that face holistic healthcare in the region. If we evaluate the performance of healthcare systems according to either the WHO 6 building blocks or according to BCG 7 elements of healthcare systems, we can see how SGLP countries face similar and very different challenges. My question today is how can we identify and measure the healthcare gaps and challenges, but most importantly, what opportunities lie behind these challenges? And how can we look at these challenges in a positive way? So, Rana, healthcare is not only clinical medicine. Years and billions of dollars go into anything before it reaches the bedside. Yet it seems that the basic sciences are almost non-existent in the region, and definitely not integrated into clinical medicine. What are the challenges and, most importantly, opportunities in that aspect?
Absolutely. I mean, doing basic research, basic scientific research, is the basis for any medical research later on, and then to reach translational medicine, right? So you discover something on the bench that you can translate into the bedside. Now, and I just want to frame what is research. Either you do research that helps humanity as a whole, so we could be doing research in Jordan that will help humanity, but there's also localized research that would help the challenges that people face within the region, within their own context. Regardless either, the question becomes how do we foster this kind of research in the region? And I think it has 3 points. One, we need to focus on the professors themselves, the faculty. And it's not just the medical faculty that are preparing the physicians to the future, it's also the basic scientist faculty. So we need both of them working together and in parallel, looking at the systems that encourage them and foster them doing research. So generally, we need them to borrow the system of writing grants to get money to establish good labs so that they could do good research in the region that is contributing to science internationally. Second, to make grant writing as part of their promotion. In most of the Arab worlds, and there are exceptions, of course, the AUB is an exception, but the majority of public universities, if you're going to get promoted, it's only what you publish. It's not how many grants you get. So it doesn't count. When I wrote grants, everybody thought I was crazy. Like, why are you writing grants? You know, just go work with somebody and publish. But you can only build a good infrastructure for doing research if you write grants and have money. Also, you need to work on the curriculum for the students. Most of our students study where they only memorize, and they never enter a lab, except if they're in graduate school. We need our undergraduates and our medical students to get to know the lab, even if they're just washing the dishes, so that they have a feeling of what does it mean to be a critical thinker, to be curious, to ask questions. And lastly, we also need an ecosystem. So we need the administration of our universities to be supportive for writing grants and administering the grants. So in most public universities, there's no grant department. Every professor by himself seeks the grant, writes the grant, and they create the budget. And then when the money comes in, the people in administration who administer the finance don't know what to do with the money, right? So that is the most important barrier going forward. And a solution for that is training administration on how to administer grants. It's a very simple solution that nobody does at all. They could, take a diploma on how to do it and then shadow a good university like AUB or other universities in the region. How do you actually transfer the grants? And I'm just going to give you a little example of how this really stops research at this very basic level. Everybody's focusing on the road, and nobody's focusing why the car isn't moving, because there's a little nail that's, that poked a hole in the tire. So when I got a big grant, relatively big, $250,000, to do genome-wide association studies, I was not able to continue for 2 years because my university would not sign off the money to do the GWAS with my collaborator in the US, because they wanted me to put a tender in the newspaper for somebody in Jordan to offer a bid. Well, this doesn't even exist in the whole Middle East. And I was like, oh, Rana, you're being corrupt because you want to go work with somebody else. Although this was in the grant that they had signed, but nobody read. So these are simple, they're barriers, but they have simple solutions if we pay attention to them. And lastly, it's about creating an ecosystem of communication. Scientists in Jordan, in the same university, don't know what's going on in other people's labs. So even across the country, even regionally. So we need more conferences, more freedom to move around, to share ideas and work in interdisciplinary teams, because nobody can do good science alone. It's all about teamwork and having an interdisciplinary approach.
Thank you so much. Shadi, I want to ask you, I'm a big follower of the Global Health Institute, and I was wondering what experiences have you had in maybe translating some of the global health research that you're doing into policy? What are the challenges there? How can you tell us any examples of the actual work on the field?
So Alex, I like the question, but I'm going to answer another question. So first of all, just to keep the spirit of the day, and to start off, to say I'm a big disbeliever in the public sector in general. Unfortunately, we have to live with the public sector, right? Because they provide the services, they're the hospitals, they're the primary healthcare clinics. I know WHO is a believer in the public sector, and I'm a believer in WHO, but not the public sector. So I'm a believer in the private sector, and I'm a believer in the partnership between the private sector and academia, since we are at an academic institution and I work at AUB. I should say that, because I think this is recorded. So for the private sector, there are two ways to engage the private sector. You either have the Fadi Ghandour example of private sector, where he as a private sector willingly contribute to the civil society in general, or you have a private sector that feels bad about how much money they're making and they want to pay back or look good. Yeah. And that's not Fadi Ghandour. Fadi Ghandour pays the money willingly. So I just want to give you an example, and if I don't talk after that, I'm fine with that. Just to share. So the panel is about Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine, right? So 2 of those 4 countries are in conflict, correct? For those people who are from Palestine and Syria in the audience, do you know what is the first thing that people do when they leave their country? What is the most important thing that they take with them? What? Medicine. Good. What else? Most important thing, especially Palestinian refugees. The key to their house. That is why he is a successful businessman. The key to their house, right? So what is equally important, although after like 3-5 years, there's no house for the key, right? So it's like when you buy napkins with no car. Yeah. Okay. So what we came up with, so the problem that we were having, and this is also, I know myself as a supporter of this, so a supporter of the concept in general. So what we said is, now you're gonna know what I'm talking about. So what we said is that what's equally important to the house key is access to their health records. These people are ending up in Greece, in Turkey, in Lebanon, in North Iraq, and there's no way for the first contact healthcare provider to know what are the health problems that they're facing. So we said, how can we solve this problem as a global health institute? So we went to the private sector. We went to Epic, which is one of the top 3 providers of healthcare records in the world. I'm not sure if you know about that. I can give them a plug because they gave us $1.5 million. So anyway, so we took, so the big plug. So we said that what we want to do is we want to create a cloud-based mobile electronic health records for every refugee in the world. We call it Sijilli. Sijilli in Arabic means my record, right? So if you have your smartphones, just Google Sijilli now. You will find that what we have done is through this partnership with the private sector, we have created that Sijilli. And now just on March 3rd, so next week, we will be celebrating 10,000 refugees who now have a Sijilli record. Wherever they go in the world, they can have secure access to their electronic health records. They end up in Greece, they end up in Turkey, in Lebanon, in North Iraq, wherever they end, in the US, in Canada, in the UK, they have access to their health records. And this is private sector. So going back to why I dislike the public sector, right? The number one entity that disliked this idea was the government, the Ministry of Public Health, right? But now after we finished 10,000 records, they saw that we can do it. And the week after, we are having a training with them, with the MOPH, because now it's a reality. So I want just to go back and tell you, if we want those 4 countries, because I agree that the Gulf is much more advanced when it comes to governance and pushing of the entrepreneurship and private sector. If we want those 4 countries to advance, we have to depend on and partner with the private sector. And I know WHO is doing that because I was on a panel. Private sector, entrepreneurship, you, young people, Rhodes Scholar, people from those 4 countries, Alex and others. Okay? So this is the opportunity, success story opportunity. I'm fine with not talking anymore in the panel.
No, that's a very, very, very interesting contribution. Thank you so much for it. I've read the Lancet article about Sijilli, and it sounds fantastic. And my question is, how do you imagine sustainability for such a project? I mean, is it going to be dependent on grants for its lifetime, or have you thought of any models that can bring sustainability?
Okay, so Epic invested, and I'm giving you the real numbers. So Epic invested $1.2 million in the infrastructure. So now we have the infrastructure in place. The next phase is to move from 10,000 to 100,000. And that's why after the talk, I'm going to talk to Fadi and see if we can do something with it. But basically, the main issue is that, unfortunately, again, the way to ensure sustainability is everyone in this room who's an entrepreneur, we do a proof of concept, and then we go to governments and tell them it has worked for 10,000 people. UN, whoever, it has worked for 10,000 people. Give us the resources to scale it up. You already have a success story. So might as well invest, increase access of your population to healthcare, reduce redundancy of services. It's crazy. We have people from Syria coming to Lebanon, even to our medical center, which we love and appreciate since this is recorded as well. But at the end of the day, they come with their own, X-rays, MRIs, CT scans, And we have our physicians, be it us, be it other hospitals in Lebanon, wherever, in Jordan, in Turkey, having these people do the exam or the X-ray or the CT scan again. I mean, NHS would go bankrupt if this happens 2 times or 3 times. And we're telling the government, you want resource savings? This is a proof of concept that worked for 10,000 people.
Thank you so much. And to the point of using technological innovations for healthcare, Jad, I've read your article about value-based healthcare and using digital transformation in emerging economies. So can you tell us your thoughts on why is it so important to measure health outcomes, and how can we do digital transformation in the SGLP region in a sustainable way?
Sure. First, thank you for having me, and thank you for organizing this great forum. Outcomes measurement. Look, as we've heard from the WHO, there's a lot of measurement from a prevention or from a overall health of the population perspective. And the WHO does a great job working with ministries of health to collect this data. However, when we look at the practice of medicine or the provision of services in healthcare, there is very little measurement of outcomes. And why is it important? I think for 3 reasons. One is to be able to distinguish which interventions actually are creating an impact. What is scandalous is that most medical activities today, there is no evidence that it delivers better outcomes to patients, yet we continue doing the same things. So we need to start measuring outcomes to understand what works and what doesn't work. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in healthcare, demand is infinite. So it's very different from any other industry where supply and demand are correlated. In healthcare, demand is infinite. So by default, not even a single country can afford to provide all the services in healthcare. So hence, prioritization is very important, and hence measuring outcomes will allow to prioritize where we want to deploy our resources. And finally, the third one is to be able to allocate resources. So where do we allocate resources given the outcomes we're getting? So where do we get the biggest bang for our bucks? So without measuring outcomes, and this is the reality today, most healthcare systems are operating in the dark. Continue repeating what we have done before and hoping for the best. Why digital transformation, and how to do it? Look, digital transformation has a lot of promises. Many countries have been pursuing it. I don't think any country globally has been able to achieve, I would say, the nirvana of digital transformation, but many are pursuing it. What we have learned is that the road is full of challenges, and a lot of mistakes have been done, very costly mistakes. However, the promise is that with digital transformation, we will be able to have at least a minimum set of data. For example, what Shadi was describing, at least at the national level, a single record per patient where we can follow the population from cradle to grave, and then use this data to be able to prioritize our interventions. But beyond that, digital transformation will allow us to move to a different type of healthcare services. Today, healthcare services are very anchored in the idea of a hospital in a building where we provide care around a doctor and a bed. A lot of research shows this is not the ideal setting for providing care. We need to move to a system where we provide care in a more convenient manner and in a more, I would say, efficient manner. Somebody asked about telemedicine. Telemedicine is just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine the ability of providing the population with tools to deal with most of their health needs on their own without the intervention of a specialist. You combine the ability of what we call the diagnostic tools at the point of care. So today, and it's not science fiction, today you can add a plugin to your phone and you can do a lot of those tests that today you go to a lab or even to a hospital to do. Add to it a layer of artificial intelligence that can use this data to guide you on things you could do yourself to improve your health. Finally, to link it to the determinants of health, when we look at what keeps you healthy, very little is about medicine. Most of it is about a healthy lifestyle and other stuff that you're responsible for, neither the government nor the hospital. So bringing all of this together will take us to a new type of healthcare and really improving the health of the population without heavy reliance on medicine.
Thank you, Jad. But then, just as a short follow-up question, how can digital transformation be done right? Because there is many ways to do it right, but there are so many ways to do it wrong.
Well, I don't know. I cannot answer the question. Nobody has done it, but I can speculate and I can share some ideas. I think one thing, avoid making the mistakes of others, which has been, if I look at the UK or even in Canada, a big bang approach to say, this is the model, this is the system, everybody adopts the same system. This has proven to be extremely costly and a big mistake. The reality is that healthcare, in its different aspect, has different needs and different realities. So a primary healthcare center has a different need from digital than a large tertiary care hospital or even a GP in a remote area. So coming in with a single solution and imposing it on all, you're imposing undue cost and efforts on a lot of these players because most of these systems have been designed, and the EPIC system, by hospitals, not by GPs and not by primary healthcare centers. So first thing, avoid these single solutions, national solution that will be imposed on everyone. Another thing I can recommend is start really with the basics. And basic means, what are the minimal data sets that we need to be able to do something about it? And then based on this minimal data set, what are the minimal data standards that we need at the national level to allow us to interchange data? And then encourage all of these providers and players to adopt whatever digital solution they want, as long as they're respecting these rules and these standards. And then basically open it up as a market. The third thing, while I am in healthcare fervent defender of the public system up to a certain level, I think there is a role for the private sector to play. And we need to think about the future healthcare infrastructure as the future utility. 100 years ago, we built a lot of water, road, and electricity utility. And we realized in a lot of countries that the private sector did a better job than the public sector at running these utilities. And I think in the healthcare sector, it will be the same. Allowing the private sector to offer these exchanges as a utility where every user will contribute a very minimal price will allow their long-term sustainability and their continuous development.
Thank you very much. Maya, I was wondering your thoughts about chronic diseases and cancer in our region. From your work with outcomes for me, there is a focus on chronic diseases and cancer. And I was wondering, what do you think are the biggest gaps in chronic diseases and cancer in the region? But then again, personalized medicine needs data. And our region is a blank slate. It's an uncharted water for data. So how can you see this shaping into a shape that would allow us actually to use this data, to use this patient samples, to create real personalized medicine from our region to our region and not imported from other countries?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I answer a question, I'm dying to ask Shadi a question on Sigil. When the refugees take it, does it get updated when they see a doctor in like Canada, whatever? Is it a central repository that's up to date or not?
So they do two things. The first is, of course, there's a physical USB in the shape of a key, and that's how actually the idea started. And secondly, all of the information is uploaded into a cloud. So wherever they end up in the world, they type Sigil and Google them or their health provider. They open it through 3-level security, and then wherever they go, there's a component for a certified healthcare provider to add medical information. Okay. Yeah.
So that would be, so it's talking about just leapfrogging. That would be something that actually does not exist anywhere else in the world. An up-to-date, globally accessible electronic health record. But to go back to your question, so let me just say a little bit why we started Outcomes for Me, and essentially the underlying challenge that's a global challenge, and then come back to the region. So We're focusing on what's called life-altering chronic diseases, cancer being one of them. So these are diseases that are not curable today, that are very high burden, and where the science is rapidly advancing. So the challenges of these diseases is because science is rapidly advances and we continue evolving how we're curing or how we're addressing them, even in very advanced countries such as the United States or Europe, it's very difficult to stay up to date unless you're in an academic center. And so how much of the burden of managing the disease is on the physicians themselves, or even educating people to manage their care and get the data that allows them to manage their care. That's kind of what led us to start the company. So that underlying challenge is the same everywhere in the world. It's really, where's the science going? How do you understand and how do you evolve to address the burden of diseases such as cancer? Now, when it comes to the region specifically, so actually the increasing incidence in cancer is the greatest in the region, in the Middle East. It's the highest increase in incidence in the world. And if you look at, there was a study done last year in Lebanon that showed for breast cancer, it has the highest increase in incidence in the world. Now, that's very multifactorial, driven by a number of things. Some of them is really underlying reasons, such as starting with the environment that actually contributes to the incidence of cancer, but also screening. So the more we screen, the earlier we're able to detect, so that's kind of artificially drives the increase in incidence, meaning the underlying incidence is still the same, it's just now you can measure it. And then some of it is just driven by people living longer, and so cancer de facto increases as people live longer. But when it comes to diseases like cancer, there's really 4 elements that are needed to really better manage them. It starts with prevention. So what can we do to actually prevent it? So that has to do with both education, personally taking action, but also public health policy. Public health policy around smoking for lung cancer, public health policy around environmental toxic agents that are really driving incidence. So there's a big public health component for prevention. The second element is diagnosis. So in cancer, early diagnosis allows you to treat. Late stage diagnosis is actually impossible to treat. So it becomes much more difficult, much more costly. So the earlier we could diagnose, the better. And that's where there's been a lot of advances in some cancers, not in all of them, where we could detect very early, breast cancer being one of them, colon cancer is another one. And so for these cancers, the infrastructure exists globally, and the question is how do you deploy it into the region, in particular into the rural sides of the regions. If you take screening devices are becoming more and more portable, so it goes back to what Jad was saying, is there's opportunities there to really deploy better screening programs. Actually, I think out of the region, in breast cancer, Lebanon, I think, has one of the best screening programs for early stage screening for breast cancer. And then it's the management. So once, post-diagnosis and treatment is the management of cancer. And that's where it gets pretty challenging because you need infrastructure. You need infrastructure that's both central but also localized. When you're administering chemotherapy, you need infusion centers. And so, one of the big challenges is also how do you get people to get to infusion centers? Where are the infusion centers? So that leads to a real investment on infrastructure. And that's where public-private partnerships or even private-driven development could be an opportunity. And then lastly, it's maintenance or even palliative care, which is not something that's extremely developed in the region. That is a huge opportunity because it leads to suffering, and there's a lot of ways to manage pain that are very proven. So there's really opportunities across the care continuum. Now, to go back to the more personalized medicine, so cancer is a genetically driven disease. Some of it inherited, some of it is not. So this is where there's a real opportunity for genetics and genomics to really kind of accelerate either the screening or the management of cancer. And this is where, you know, what you were saying around understanding the genetic makeup of cancer in our countries is essential. Because again, to take breast cancer as an example, in Lebanon, BRCA, which is one of the main genes, is not more prevalent in Lebanon than elsewhere. But there are a lot of other genetic variants that are driving that incidence. So really doing those studies becomes very critical. And I could keep on going, but let me give it back to you. So.
Thank you so much for this. I think it seems that there is a lot of potential for research in the region. And Mohammed, your work with the Palestinian Neuroscience Initiative highlights this potential. So I would really like you to tell us more about the work of the PNI, and maybe touch very lightly on also the
all of the points.
some examples of how the person doing the research in the region carries some responsibility of doing it the right way.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. So I think it more boils down to a very simple realization for me, which is how do we look at challenges and how do we face challenges? And in my reality, I come from Palestine. We have this big monster called the political situation, the occupation. And I think we go head to head with it. And it's much bigger than any individual. And you're always doomed to lose that battle. So the way I think about it is that I don't want to look at it face to face. I want to look at it from above, as a part of a larger reality that actually makes occupation or the political situation part of the problem that apparently somebody like me, the limited individual, cannot really solve, but shows me other components of the problem that actually can have impact. And actually, interestingly enough, it shows me also the continuum of historical events that led to that reality, so that I can understand exactly where this data point came from. Interestingly enough, we're sitting in a hall named under Lord Milner, who signed the Balfour Declaration, actually. And in one way or another, he actually contributed to the reality my people are facing these days. 100 years later, interestingly. So what I'm saying here is 36% of the West Bank is affected by clinical depression. And these numbers are not just from my studies. These numbers have been replicated in at least 5 independent studies that were done through different routes. And for me, this is a disaster. And we can actually feel bad about it forever. We can easily attribute it to the big monster that I just talked about immediately. And then we feel at peace. And problem solved, we know the problem. But does this solve the problem? And the answer is absolutely not. So I think actually it boils down again to me, to the reality that we need to invest in what matters. And in my country, allow me to call it a country actually here, it actually boils down to investing in humans in multiple ways. First of all, we have the young generation. The educational system is completely inept, is incapable of producing scholars. It's more of a spoon-feeding, big school setup that doesn't really produce critical thinkers. And I think we need to acknowledge this to start with. This actually kind of puts some responsibility on every shoulder in this room, at least, to realize that we need to fix that to start with. And to invest in the young generation in order to be able to, simply, I don't want to talk about GWAS studies. I leave this to Rana, who has the expertise there. But I want to talk about how do you ask a question? How do you seek an answer? What is research? What is the scientific methodology? As simple as that. You want to make it as simple as possible, but not simpler, as per Albert Einstein. So what I'm saying here is you invest in humans by, looking at these younger generations and trying to at least train them on the very basics, give them the vehicles to be able to talk to the rest of the world. Show them that there is actually a bigger world out there that you can talk to, that you can actually explore, that you can dream, at least. The second way of investing in humans is actually by investing in the patients themselves. So let me go back to the first point. Over the past 10 years at the Palestinian Neuroscience Initiative, we managed to train 250 researchers at all levels, from all disciplines. Medical students, mathematicians, computer scientists, computer engineers, you name it. Because basically, this is the spirit of science. It's crossing boundaries. Unfortunately, we cannot cross boundaries to the west side of Palestine, but more of we can cross boundaries within ourselves, at least, So let me go to the second point, which is investing in patients. 8 to 9 out of 10 patients with psychiatric problems in Palestine go to the sheikh or to the healer before they go to the psychiatrist. Some of them actually die at the hands of the healers, being beaten by sticks to get the spirit, the jinni, out of them, These are statistics. These are numbers that I see every single day with the patients that we're dealing with in Palestine. This is compounded by other major problems that I think Shadi and Jad and Rana and Maya touched upon. The response rate to antidepressants does not exceed 30%. These are global numbers. So basically, and you're talking about a significantly underserved sector in Palestine, 2.9 million people in the West Bank. I'm not talking Gaza here, I'm from the West Bank. That are only served by 24 psychiatrists. Most of them are above the age of 60, and there is not a single board-certified child psychiatrist for the population where 64% of which are under the age of 24. So this is the reality. But again, how can I invert the picture? How can I use this as a game changer, basically? So what we did with the Palestinian Neuroscience Initiative is that we didn't want to be grandiose at all. We didn't want to say science is based on tools. We wanted to say science is based on great ideas. So let's take what is locally relevant, but internationally generalizable. Clinical depression, it's the leading cause for morbidity worldwide, second leading cause for mortality. So if we can actually study depression in the context of Palestine, and by the way, we have an amazing opportunity to do so to help the rest of the world as well, not just Palestinians, we can actually put ourselves on the map. So what we've been doing for the past 10 years is explore these realities. Look at depression from the context of, literally patients playing simple computer games. Again, I don't want to be grandiose in terms of the approach that I use. Very simple, very attainable. Collecting questionnaires, and there are tons of them. Talking to public health professionals and see exactly what are the determinants of outcomes, what are the determinants of disease, studying the basic structure of the society and how that actually influences a disorder. Trying to look at very simple genetic techniques. We call them single nucleotide polymorphisms. And my forte and the closest to my heart, doing computational analysis, computational modeling. Because all you need there is a computer. And that's basically how the Palestinian Neuroscience Initiative started. One person and one laptop. Right now we have 50 researchers in 6 research units.
That's fantastic.
But basically it all started with a very simple single idea, no grandiosity. And then treat the problem from the bottom up by looking at the challenges in an inverted manner. And then actually along the way, there has to be a very, very clear human perspective to it so that the rest of the world would actually buy what you're doing. How does this actually change the reality? So after 10 years of research, we managed to actually contribute to the literature on depression in terms of how do we identify future responders and non-responders to treatment. One of the biggest advantages of doing the research in Palestine, not anywhere else in the world, by the way, is that you can look at the patients at their medication-naive state, never treated. You get a lot of them. I've been in the US for 10 years. I couldn't manage to recruit one patient who is medication-naive. Everybody is on something. And these are, by the way, CDC numbers. 1 out of 10 Americans is on some form of antidepressants. So what I'm saying here is, so we now patented 3 inventions for a computer system, and this is a call for Shadi and Maya and Jad actually to collaborate as well. No, he already did actually. I'm really here because of this man, And I couldn't really acknowledge him enough. Fadi Ghandour, who actually kind of, there are really great and good human beings in this world. And I'm really always flattered and honored to see Fadi and to actually interact with him. He was one of the people who actually sponsored the programs. Of course, he didn't mention it because I'm sure he does a lot of these amazing things, but under the table. So basically what I'm saying is that these three inventions are using computer games to diagnose psychiatric disorders. If you play a 5-minute game, I can tell you based on very clean data, and actually this gets to a problem. So what kind of data, what kind of data structuring do we need in order to actually get better outcomes? And I'm putting the data scientist hat here. And ultimately, so we can use these very simple tools to diagnose psychiatric disorders with 95% accuracy and a priori predict response to treatment because we have access to the right data set in Palestine from Palestine so that in that part of the world that lacks peace, that lacks the basics, we can actually help the rest of the world.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So it seems that there is a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities. These opportunities might require a touch of regulation. How can we create local regulations that emerges according to the local context? We would really appreciate your experience with the stem cell.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah.
Say touch, what do you mean?
A gentle touch of regulation. I'm not supportive of regulation.
Actually, this leads from what you said. It starts with education and creating critical thinkers in the citizens themselves by starting with reading from a young age, so hopefully to change the education system. But ultimately, in order to create rules and regulations to help monitor and provide guidelines for the physicians, the patients, and the general citizen, we need to create legislation. Because there's a lot of fake therapies out there. I mean, some of them are religious, some of them are not taking advantage, like stem cell therapies that come from many countries, I'm not going to mention them, that come into the Arab world and offer these fantastic therapies. And when somebody's sick, they will do anything and they will pay anything. I mean, one could go on and on, but I don't want to advertise them either. So the idea is, how do you make your general public aware, and how do you put legislation in place to prevent physicians from taking advantage of this, because this is a profit-making business. So one thing we did in Jordan is I started creating a committee of stakeholders to come together at one table to decide what are the regulations and guidelines we're going to use for stem cell therapy, because that was one of the therapies that is very profit-making and most of it is fake and plays on people's emotions and feelings. And this was kind of a new way of doing things. Most legislation is done either by people who are lawyers or from the legal and political arena, and they will invite religious people because some of it has to do with your everyday life as a human being. But I said, no, that's not enough. We need to invite the scientists, we need to invite the physicians, we need to invite the patients themselves to sit all of us together and tackle can I use stem cell therapy? Can I do research on stem cells or not? Whether we're talking human embryonic stem cells or adult stem cells, the whole thing. So we sat for a number of years explaining to everybody, explaining their position to the other people on the table. Most importantly, it was the scientists explaining the science to the religious people, to the politicians, that if you're going to, for example, introduce a stem cell into a body, if this is coming from the same human being, it's okay. If it's coming from a human embryo, again, discussing what is a human embryo, and looking at different religions, Jordan and other Arab countries, we have Muslims, we have Christians, we have other religious groups. So we had to have all those to discuss with them. How are we going to go forward? And we came up with a law, and Jordan was the first country in the Middle East, and even in the Islamic world, to actually have a law that governs stem cell research and stem cell therapy, and we kind of put a role model. Now, the second thing is that this committee didn't just go home and that's it, and we shut it down. This is an ongoing committee, because research, as you mentioned, is changing every minute, every day. So the new issues, for example, are the 3-parent baby. I don't know if you've heard of that. Is that okay or not? I mean, England produced a law that was okay. And actually, the first people who actually did a 3-parent baby was a Jordanian couple in Mexico. So the issue was, is this okay as a Jordanian citizen, as a Muslim? Because now we have issues that actually go across countries. As a Muslim, it doesn't matter where I am in the world. I could be in the Arab region, I could be in Malaysia, I could be in the US or Europe. And with the refugee challenge, we have Muslims everywhere. And this is going to be a problem even in Europe and the US for physicians and patients. Can I use this kind of therapy or not? And the last one that we all have heard of is CRISPR and editing the babies that happen in China. Is this okay or not? There was no stand And not just this is not an Arab thing. This is more of a cultural, religious thing. And there was no stand from the Muslim world. You know, the Muslim world is about 1.6 billion people. There was no stand. Is this okay or not? I mean, we were the only one who actually wrote a letter to nature, not giving a stand because we don't have the authority, but we just, you know, proposed, let's share what Islamic guidelines have done in the past in terms of ethics. And we suggested the 5 tenets of looking at ethics, of doing anything from an Islamic perspective, just to shed light on the world. And so we have to be present on the international arena, because it's not just in Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. It's actually it's going everywhere because of the waves of immigration and refugees that are going everywhere. And so, for example, the International Stem Cell Society that produces the guidelines for the world doesn't have a Muslim on their board. So, and they depend on the members. And as we know, most of Arabs or Muslims in the world are coming from the underdeveloped, so they don't have money to be members in these societies. So and the society depends on the membership, the voting of the members. And I tell them, but did you check that your members are not coming from that other religion in the world? So these are issues that we need to be aware of as scientists, as physicians. We have to put ourselves out there and be active participants. Most of us don't. And because of some of these laws and regulations are very touchy subjects, most physicians and scientists are scared to go there. You know, let's stay safe, let's stick to this. But we can't, because the fake people are coming in and taking advantage of the vacuum that's present there. So this is also a call for people to be out there. And I don't know if this is part of the question you were going to ask, but those scholars that are now studying in the UK or in the US and Europe, and when you want to go back, what do you do? Because most people are scared to go back, and that's why we have the brain drain.
I mean, exactly. This is what I was going to.
So should I continue?
Maybe if I add some notes.
Okay.
But basically, I mean, it's fascinating because we have such a diversity in our panel, and everyone has achieved impact in a different way. So, for example, as a student here today, I mean, I can see a lot of problems in the region. I can see solutions. I want to change. Change the status quo. I'm unhappy with it. What should I do after I finish? Sometimes I wonder, should I stay here, try to achieve impact from here? Should I go back, try to achieve impact from there? So it would be really great if you can tell us about your thought process when you were faced with these questions, concerns, fears, experience.
Okay. So, I mean, what I tell my students, everybody has their own journey, and there's no right or wrong, right? Everybody has their own path, their own decisions to make, their own circumstances. But a few guidelines is when you're abroad, connect with as many people as you can. Go out there, meet people, attend workshops, take courses, even if they don't seem related to your discipline, just learn as much as possible, because you will need all of that when you go home, right? You need those connections, you need those networks, and you need all that knowledge and skills and expertise that you can gain from being in a place like Oxford, where there's so much out there. You know, so take advantage of that. And don't just stick to going to your room and back to your class and your lab and that's it, right? Go everywhere, learn everything. That's number one. Number two, when you go back, and I ask everybody to go back, just give it a try. Don't listen to others, because I have made it, and others have made it. So it's about believing, and I think that's another thing. You have to believe that you can make a difference. Yes, there's so many people who are going to tell you, it's not going to work, I gave up, but you know what? It's not even easy to make it in the US. It's difficult. There's a competition on grants. It's a really tough world. So it's not that easy either, right? So it's about you believing that, I make a difference. I'm not disposable. I can make a difference. And actually, we can draw this from our own culture, right? Our culture says, in our philosophy from the Islamic civilization, is about, all you have to do is try. You're not responsible to get a result. You're responsible to try. And if every one of us really tries, we will make a difference. So therefore, when you go back, don't listen to people who are negative. Surround yourself with positive people and just put your head down and say, I'm going to make it happen. It's about believing. Muhammad Ali Clay has a saying that nothing is impossible, right? If you believe it's impossible, of course you're not going to succeed. It's all about you and what you believe in. And we know there's challenges, but I think half the solution is acknowledging that there's a problem. right? And then you face it. You know, I know there's going to be a problem. And then you go by it one by one, figuring it out. And by the way, you'll pave the way for the next generation, for the people after you. You would have had a hard time in a particular place, but the person after you will thank you because you solved that one. It's not that you've solved them all. There's always going to be something else. But that's how we can all work together collectively as a team to make a difference going forward.
Rana, that's a great point.
All right.
That's a
Great.
fascinating point.
بعدها بأولها.
Thank you so much for...
So, and I'm one of those negative ones. So I would say, do not go back until, do not go back until you have an idea of what sort of change or impact in your life and in the life of society you can make. If you just want to finish and go back لأنه بابا وماما صرت دكتور, it's you know, that's not enough. If you do not have a clear idea of what can you do, like Muhammad did, if you cannot achieve what Muhammad and the Muhammads of this Arab world did with a clear idea on how to improve your life and the life of your society, stay here until you are grounded and then go back. So I'm a pragmatist, and I appreciate your optimism and the love of SJLP. I love them as well. But I think it's just, you know, be grounded first. And I just want to, a quick off the topic note, but I think you used about, you know, with me, is that I know that I come from AUB, which is an institution that I'm so proud to be with, but I think we have also Dr. Jabra with us, who is also the president of the Lebanese American University, which is also a very good and reputable university in Lebanon, and so many others in the Arab world. So Dr. Jabra, يعطيك العافية.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I was also very interested to know your thoughts, Maya and Jad, about what can the diaspora contribute from the private sector. Maya, you're in the innovation economy. You're creating a startup. Jad, you're in consulting. How do you think can the members of the diaspora from this part of the economy contribute back to the region?
Yeah, so first I do want to say, I think no matter what you're doing, wherever you are in the world, I think always realize that you're an ambassador to your country. I was in the US where nobody around me could place Syria on the map. Unfortunately, I'm still in the US where everybody can now place Syria on the map for the wrong reasons. But even whether it was back then or now, people are very curious. When I tell them I'm from Syria, they're shocked, and then that opens a conversation. I think, to me, whether you're going back or not, today, wherever you are an ambassador, and take it to your advantage. Because most people around you that are not from the region actually don't know the region. So it's really an opportunity to let them see the good sides of the regions, which is what you bring. When I started the company, so let me tell you really my passion, why I'm starting this company and where I'm going with it. So I live in the US, and so the other thing I do want to say, it's not a de facto going back or not doing anything, which is very important. Now I have to say, I'm from Syria. In 2011, I was seriously thinking of going back, and then, you know, a few things derailed the whole project, but it is not, if you don't go back, that means you can't contribute. And that's also very important, because what you're doing, there's a lot of ways to contribute, and arguably you can contribute a lot from abroad in very different ways. You know, what we're doing with the company, so the company is really focused, it uses mobile technology so that it could go to everywhere in the world. Our goal is to make it a viable business based on the US market, to go back to what Fadi said, so that makes it viable, but then it's actually deployable everywhere in the world. And so our goal is to go to low-income countries where we could accelerate essentially the awareness and the collection of data that's going to drive health policy. So that's really what we want to do. But maybe just to kind of leave with a message, for me personally, it's really, whether it's the small things, where you're in a casual conversation and people casually ask you where you're from, thinking you're going to tell them in other states in the US, and then that opens up a whole conversation about the country, or whether what you ended up studying and how you've developed, you can contribute both as an ambassador to people in the country. They're interested, whether it's entrepreneurship or, kind of helping them be more aware of what they could become themselves, or practically doing something that could ultimately impact. I think there's really a million ways to contribute. So at the end, it's really what gets you passionate and fired up. That's what you should do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not in a good position to advise anyone on this topic. I left and I never wanted to come back, so. But I agree with Maya. I think being there is not the question if should I stay or should I go. This is not the right question. The question is, do you feel like contributing, yes or no? And if you do, then you can find your way. I think being outside, there are so many ways of contributing, especially if I link it back to one of the earliest panelists has, in my opinion, very rightly diagnosed the problem of our countries is a very, I would say, not only bad governance, but a governance system that is now hijacking the countries. So for you to be able to go there and think that you can change from within, I think it's very difficult. You need to be patient, you need to build the right coalition, and change is going to be, I don't want to be pessimistic, but very hard. However, being outside and being able to shape at the global level, all of our countries are hooked into global organization. The WHO is one of them, but there are many such organizations, the Euromed and other. And your ability to shape these organizations, in my opinion, is much larger than being inside. So again, there is no one solution. And I think the real question is, do you feel like contributing? And even if you're contributing to the country who's hosting you now, indirectly you will be contributing back to your original country.
Thank you very much. Mohammed.
So allow me to bring in some of my, some of my problems in this life into this discussion, including being deeply immersed in multidimensional mathematics, mental health, the reality of the concept of well-being, and the concept of capacity building, and put all of that in the mix in order to try to actually, address the points that my esteemed colleagues actually talked about. To start with, do you go back or not go back? So, and I was really inspired by the performance yesterday by Kenan and Kevork actually. Where is home, really? So that's always a very key question to ask. And I come from the very extreme perspective of being an internationalist. I don't believe in anything called nationalism, when it comes to this, because ultimately we're humans. And if we don't acknowledge that, there is a sincerely major problem. So actually, I leave my students with the, with the same problem I'm encountering, which is being multidimensional. In other words, I completely agree and support what Shadi was saying. You have to be properly grounded. You have to be somebody. I started the PNI at 22 years of age. I was a fifth-year medical student at that point. Nobody believed me. Everybody laughed at me. And it gives me really a lot of reward to remember these moments because, you kind of lose any stains there are on your ideals. You know exactly where you're going and what you're going for, not for any kind of praise. You know that. It's going to be a very rough and very tough journey. Let me also add to that the reality that I study systems that control failure in the brain. I literally stick wires in rats' brains and see them do behavior online while I'm observing their electrical activity. Our brains are significantly more equipped with systems that actually can support failure than their ability to process reward and success. But for some reason, and I think it's a human problem rather than just Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine issue, we're trained to look at the tip of the iceberg. Success. This person accomplished this and this and that. But what happened under that surface? And I think this is the part that we're missing. And this is basically what I leave my students with. If you think that you're relevant, contribute. Do not do a grandiose mission. Start with a very small, simple nucleus where you are somebody, you can do something. And then if you think it's worth it, go from there. Out of the 250 students, 15 of our graduates at the PNI are currently pursuing PhDs in clinical specialties in Europe, in the US. And I can assure you, each and every one of them has a link to Palestine. All we ask for sometimes is literally to spend 2 hours per week for 3 weeks a year, teaching a group of students about a concept that that person has expertise in, no more. So they're leaving their touch there, and they're being part of the process. And ultimately, it's all about networking after all. We don't know each other. Let me give you myself as an example. I gave a TED talk on the main stage. My story was covered in Science magazine, in Nature, in Forbes, National Geographic. People in Palestine don't know about the initiative. So I believe there is a serious problem when it comes to us knowing about each other. And there are no platforms to support that. And, I agree, there is nothing, I don't think it's the right question to ask whether to go back or not. There always should be some kind of contribution. There should always be some kind of contribution, but I completely agree. You have to be, really well-versed in what you're telling others. Otherwise, it might result in serious ramifications.
And that's fascinating because what we can take away from this panel is that there is no one way to contribute, basically. I want to open the floor for 2 quick questions.
So it's about, the question is about the personalized medicine and the cloud. So I'm quite motivated about this. I have a PhD in AI and cloud computing. I occasionally work on that. But what I want to ask about is, since in order to do personalized medicine, you need to exploit data. And also you need to rely on black box machine learning techniques that you don't really understand what's going inside. Now in the community of AI, we are talking about explainable AI, and there's regulation in place. In Europe, for instance, we have the GDPR, which is a law that enforces the right of explanation, how the data is exploited, and so on. So I'd like to know if there's any similar initiative in the region.
Thank you so much. One other quick question?
One comment and one question. The first comment is it's incredible that we had to come here to meet each other. You guys are all amazing. I hope you work together, and I hope you also connect to people working on the development and education side, because there's a lot to bring together that could be extremely beneficial. I can think of something for each of you, so let's please talk after. My question is about early childhood, research shows that it's completely overlooked in the region, both from an education and a health perspective. If there's anything that you can say about that from your perspective and what you think should be done, I'd love to hear that in your final comments. Thank you.
All right. All right, so I'll make an attempt, and then I'll give it to others. First, I want to answer your question about early childhood, because that's my field, both from an education perspective.
May I interrupt?
Very short.
We have 3 minutes,
Yeah.
so it's 1.5, 1.5
Don't worry.
question. Yeah, I'm sorry, but because we have...
So we're leading initiatives to create programs that are grassroots, that address mental health issues in a preventive approach, not in a therapy approach, because many of the problems that the early childhood faces because they are preventable. So We Love Reading is one example. There'll be an expert case about that, of how you can do intervention by working with parents and children to do that. And there are more and more initiatives trying to tackle that issue. So that's number one. So it hits education and mental health. And the other thing I wanted to just comment briefly is the mention about having a platform for all Arab scientists all over the world to work together. And so the Society for the Advancement of Science and Technology in the Arab world, which I was recently appointed president, I'm offering this platform out there for anybody or everybody to be part of it as a neutral platform to allow people to exchange and talk and communicate and do collaboration. to you.
So basically, again, thank you, Rana, and I'm looking forward to talking to all of you after this. To touch upon the early childhood part, I think from a genetic perspective, it has a myriad of applications in terms of genetics or epigenetics, and there's tons of research on that actually to show that actually these are really key, important developmental parts of somebody's life and somebody's age that actually should be focused on in a better way. But also I like to think about it from the cognitive perspective and the behavioral perspective, and this is basically what we study because epigenetically we can't do the analysis. At least I know in Palestine we don't have the infrastructure to do that kind of analysis.
We're doing it.
And you,
We're doing
and
it.
you do it. Okay, perfect. So we have a collaborator here. So basically what I'm saying here is, and it's still a very early field in terms of its development. But in terms of behavior, there are things that could be immediately changed and modified in order to actually limit the effects of early childhood trauma, for example, on the ultimate development of psychiatric disorders. There is tons of literature, but the problem is, how do you get this to be a protocol? How do you apply it? How do you start a niche where people can tell you, you are the person with expertise, and I want you to tell me what to do? I was recently, honored to be on the Lancet Commission for Global Mental Health and Sustainable Development, and this was one of the key issues, is to think about the biopsychosocial model. I'm a brain scientist. I see the world from the lens of the brain, but the reality is it's not. It's not as simple as that. So I think there should be more integrative ways to think about these problems and actually to dissect from a data science perspective, what do we mean by early childhood and early development problems?
Thank you, Mohammed.
Yeah, and I want just to point out that actually there will be an expert session on that would touch upon some of these aspects actually tomorrow on building capacity for research in the developing world.
Fantastic. Please join me giving the amazing panel an applause.